Rajiv Gandhi was committed to the notion of restoring India to the status of a major world power, whose legitimate place was indeed in the front rank of nations, and whose voice carried weight in global discourses. It was with this agenda that he embarked upon creating a personal rapport with international leaders, who returned his gesture with equal generosity, accepting him as an international statesman within months of his being elected Prime Minister.
To him it was India, and India must be a great country. India must be a strong country. India must be respected in the world. I mean, these were high ideals. He set for himself very high ideals. In some cases, of course, we lived up to those ideals. That is one of the reasons why he was easily accepted as a world statesman within a few months of his coming to office.
And it was with statesmanship that he made his contribution to those issues which so preoccupied the world. For him, it was a logical extension of the Gandhian ethic of non-violence. The threat of a nuclear holocaust was a real danger, and Rajiv continued with his efforts to battle this as well, using every world fora to highlight the threat that nuclear weapons constituted.
The major powers have recently agreed to resume discussions on nuclear weapons. This is a good development, and we welcome it.
And in the Six-Nation, Five-Continent Initiative, he found an ideal forum to propagate his views.
We want these negotiations not to be confined to ways of dealing with only the consequences of improvements in capacity and delivery systems. They must ultimately address themselves to the basic objective, which is the elimination of all nuclear weapons.
Mikhail Gorbachev shared with Rajiv his own strong ideas on this subject. Long before the West woke up to the seriousness of the new Soviet leader's views on peace and arms reduction, Rajiv was taking Gorbachev seriously. Rajiv had established a warm and special friendship with Mikhail Gorbachev. The Delhi Declaration signed by Rajiv and Gorbachev was one of the most profound enunciations of a policy for non-violence and global disarmament.
We were heartened by his ready acceptance of the successive proposals of the Six-Nation, Five-Continent Initiative for Disarmament. His own proposals at Reykjavik go far beyond what we attempted. They are remarkable for their sweep and boldness. In the interest of humanity, all nuclear weapon countries must come together in a binding compact to eliminate nuclear weapons and prevent the spread of confrontation to outer space.
Although Gorbachev had created a new Soviet Union with his glasnost and perestroika, the Cold War era was not quite over. Rajiv realized that India was by temperament and tone a natural member and leader of the non-aligned movement. Non-alignment had been the guiding foreign policy principle of Jawaharlal Nehru, who together with President Nasser of Egypt and Marshal Tito of Yugoslavia had been instrumental in the early 1960s in forming NAM, which brought together countries that shared the ideal of neutrality in a bipolar world. In 1983, Indira Gandhi became the chairperson of NAM, and Rajiv Gandhi succeeded her to the post when he became Prime Minister. He bravely set forth to take over the leadership of this forum and used it to fight for the causes of the developing nations.
Non-alignment matters to the world because we are the conscious keepers of humanity. We are the voice of sanity. We are the refuge of the small state in an insecure world. We are the custodians of freedom and human dignity. We offer coexistence, not co-destruction. We offer consensus, not confrontation. We reject all domination and seek none ourselves.
He was only carrying forward the legacy of his grandfather and mother, bringing to it his own fresh approach by shedding the blinkers which could so easily have kept India in confrontation with its neighbors. His historic trip to China in 1988 and the equally historic handshake with China's octogenarian leader Deng Xiaoping lay the basis for new bilateral ties.
Differences over the border led to unfortunate events that strained our relationship. It is now time to look beyond the past. It is now time to look forward to the future.
26 years of animosity were to be replaced with mutual discussions for the resolution of the border problems. Rajiv's visit would mark a new beginning for a Sino-Indian relationship.
He broke through the bamboo curtain, as it were, and got across to the Chinese leadership. And as a result, we've developed this wonderful, what I call a two-track model of relationship with China. You've got your problems, you've surrounded those problems and frozen them, and said, let's look for a mechanism that will reduce the intensity of these problems one day, which will throw up a method of solving these problems. And a fast track where you look at opportunities, economic, cultural, educational, people-to-people contacts, and you move fast.
Similarly with Benazir Bhutto in Pakistan. He tried to cut through the years of antagonism and craft an innovative association. He visited Pakistan 3 times, and although he was quick to offer the hand of friendship, he was equally quick to remind Pakistan of the ground realities which came in the way of an abiding relationship between the two neighbors.
There is a great destiny that lies before India and Pakistan. It is a destiny we can achieve together as friends and good neighbors. We are united by the cultural history of the last 5,000 years. That said, we are realists. We recognize that notwithstanding all the goodwill in the world, there are between us real problems on the ground and real differences in perception. These have to be resolved before we can definitely move together forward.
Rajiv realized that if India was to play a role in international affairs, it would have to carry its neighbors with it. And when SAARC, the body of economic and regional cooperation, was born, he made it a point to address nearly all of its major sessions.
History binds us closely. We draw sustenance from several common sources. We share religions, languages, experiences, aspirations. Each of us has something of the other. An ancient political thinker of our region, Kautilya, listed friendly neighbors as a major source of strength. The aim of SAARC is to build such a relationship amongst the 7 of us.
At times, Rajiv even put his life on the line as he sought to find solutions for seemingly insurmountable problems. He was a target for numerous terrorist organizations. One major attack on him was in Colombo, Sri Lanka, where, after having signed the Indo-Sri Lanka Treaty while he was being given a guard of honor, he was attacked by a naval cadet. It was Rajiv's relentless stand against apartheid in South Africa and his persistent crusade for the emancipation of the frontline states which won him the gratitude of millions of black Africans. He battled for mandatory sanctions against South Africa. On his initiative, an Africa Fund was set up at the 1986 Non-Aligned Summit in Harare. The fund set out to collect money to compensate frontline African states for the inevitable economic losses arising from sanctions against South Africa.
They will have problems of their own coming from the sanctions that they apply. They will also have problems coming from retaliatory measures or counter-sanctions or whatever you like to call them that South Africa and Pretoria might apply. They will need help to overcome this. We will try and help them. A horror that is being perpetuated in the last corner of the world. There is no doubt in anybody's mind that apartheid must go and that apartheid will go.
Seeking the release of Nelson Mandela was for Rajiv a personal mission. And when subsequently, after Mandela's release, he met the great leader during the latter's visit to Delhi in 1990, it was a meeting of two statesmen from different countries, but each sharing the same ideal. Rajiv's ideals for India as a global player was to influence his outlook on the Indian economy. As Prime Minister, he pursued measures which were considered radical at the time.
He had a very clear perception that we needed a change in policy. He was aware that the world had changed and that India had to do different things in the middle of the 1980s than we were doing earlier. And I think many of the initiatives to government control, open up the economy, certainly began during that period.
Within a year of his leaving office, the Indian economy was in the doldrums, and by 1991, Indian gold had to be pledged to keep the country solvent in the international market. His economic philosophy shaped the Congress election manifesto. Its basic thrust was to unshackle Indian business and its integration into the global economy. For many observers, India's economic successes of the last 2 years can be attributed to Rajiv's vision.
The manuscript is entirely his vision, his view to this. And I know, and I can say this without any fear of contradiction, that he was an ardent champion of liberalization. He wanted to dismantle this huge bureaucratic system that had been erected over 40 years and give back power to the people. Not only political power, but also economic power, to take economic decisions, to run businesses.
From 1987 onwards, Rajiv was besieged by political problems, including a ceaseless attack on his government on the Bofors issue. He was being distracted from completing the task he had set for himself.
So Rajiv's sincerity, his own honesty, his own integrity, his urge to do something for the country started getting blurred by this major propaganda blitz against him because vested interests started feeling threatened.
Nonetheless, he forged ahead, attempting at least to set in motion, if not actually achieve, some of his major goals. Rajiv was a man in a hurry, and in 4 years he had packed in some phenomenal achievements.
There was always a rush of ideas in his mind. He was always combating with 100 ideas every day. And he lived in a hurry. He packed almost 20 years of living into those 5 years. But if he'd lived for 20 years, he might have packed 100 years of life there.
Rajiv was young, and the youth identified with him. This imparted urgency to his actions, a sense of purpose to his policies. He found in the youth of the country untapped and unharnessed energy. And the youth responded in good measure.
The greatest thing that really Rajiv ji wanted to do was to get the youth involved in nation building. He had a direct rapport with the youth. And they looked upon him as a symbol of all that they were looking for. You know, somebody young, somebody full of idealism, somebody with a vision for the future, somebody who perhaps for the next 50 years was going to really determine the course of Indian history.
By the time the 1989 elections were announced, the opposition, setting aside their ideological differences, came together with a one-point agenda: to remove Rajiv Gandhi. It was to be a brutal and no-holds-barred campaign. But the election result offered no conclusive winner, and for the first time in India's political history, there was a hung parliament. The Congress under Rajiv was the single largest party, and although he was asked by the president to form the government, Rajiv gracefully demitted office.
Friends, the people have given their verdict. In all humility, we respect the verdict. a new government will be formed, we extend to them our good wishes and offer them our constructive cooperation.
VP Singh was sworn in as the new Prime Minister heading the National Front government. 1990 was a turbulent year. Communal forces were being given legitimacy, and the Ayodhya issue was being exploited by the BJP as a political weapon. Even though he was now in the opposition, to many observers, Rajiv Gandhi's political stature did not diminish.
He was much larger in opposition than he had been in government. Despite the aura of government and prime ministerial office having disappeared, he was never reduced in size. He kept growing from day to day, from minute to minute.
Reinforced by this image, Rajiv launched his battle against obscurantist forces by going back to the people. He began his Sadbhavna Yatras to different parts of the country. Many of these journeys were by train, excursions into the heartland of the country. As the crowds that greeted him in these yatras swelled, his colleagues were convinced that Rajiv Gandhi's comeback was inevitable.
People came in their thousands at railway stations. He just seemed to merge. He was part of them. He was one of them. And he seemed to absolutely at ease, if I may say so. He seemed to enjoy, getting around and getting really to be one of them.
He instinctively realized that a secular India was the only one capable of surmounting differences of caste, creed, and religion. Time and again, he reminded us of the dangers of communal and casteist politics. This time, he carried the battle against these divisive forces with even greater passion.
He used an expression which was to become, if you like, the leitmotif of his prime ministership and indeed of his years in the opposition, which was the words, "Secularism is the bedrock of our nationhood." He just could not conceive of India surviving a communal Holocaust. He just could not conceive of India as surviving on the basis of a communal definition. And therefore, he struggled against communalism right through his political life.
Towards the end of 1990, L.K. Advani's Rath Yatra, as well as VP Singh's implementation of the Mandal Commission report, had left the nation divided as never before. The political bickering within the Janata Dal added another bleak dimension to an already unstable scenario. In November 1990, the BJP withdrew its support to the National Front government. VP Singh's government lost the vote of confidence on the floor of the House, and he had to resign. The Chandrasekhar government, which followed, lasted only a couple of months, and by March 1991, the country was preparing itself for fresh elections, slated for the end of May that year. Rajiv Gandhi began his election campaign energized by the knowledge that the country was weary of opportunistic communal and casteist forces and was looking for stability and change, for hope. Rajiv had by now honed his vision, and already his legacy was becoming evident to the nation. The Congress manifesto formulated by him clearly spelt out the agenda for the Congress government if it were voted back to power. His time as Prime Minister had taught him that in order to carry his message, he had to go to the people directly and not through power brokers or intermediaries. So incandescent was his personality that he always managed an instant rapport with the people. He plunged into the crowds that flocked to greet him at every meeting. The frenzied campaign kept him away from his family for most of the time, and on the 20th of May, he returned to Delhi after a hectic schedule to spend a few minutes with them before leaving for another bout of campaigning. No one could have known then that this would be his last walk down 10 Janpath. On May the 21st, Rajiv addressed a series of meetings in Orissa and Andhra Pradesh. After a mammoth public rally in Visakhapatnam, he flew out to Madras for his last engagement. In Sri Perumbudur, a human bomb was waiting for him. At 10:20 p.m. that night, Rajiv Gandhi was killed in a huge terrorist bomb blast. India mourned the death of yet another patriot, of a young leader whose vision had stirred the country's imagination, whose legacy symbolized the aspirations of the young and of the women particularly. Rajiv constantly challenged convention, cliches, and dogma. His legacy encompassed pride in the motherland, an instinctive pledge to its unity and integrity, to its secular fabric, and above all, to the welfare of its people, especially those who lived in all its villages and towns. Although he was only leader of the opposition when he was killed, hundreds of world leaders flew in for his funeral. It was a glorious tribute to a man whose vision and legacy had managed to embrace the entire world.
I am young, and I too have a dream. I dream of an India strong, independent, self-reliant, and in the forefront and the front rank of the nations of the world in the service of mankind.
As the train carrying his ashes inched towards Allahabad, where they were to be immersed in the holy Sangam, multitudes thronged the route to pay their homage to their departed leader.
Let us build an India, proud of her independence, powerful in defense of her freedom, strong, self-reliant in agriculture, industry, and front-rank technology, united by bonds transcending barriers of caste, creed, and...
Rajiv Gandhi was posthumously awarded the Bharat Ratna, the highest award the nation could confer on him. His widow Sonia Gandhi received the award on his behalf.